Support for Connecticut East This Week comes from Alliance for Living, the only HIV/AIDS service organisation and resource centre in southeastern Connecticut that also deals with homelessness and assists people dealing with substance use disorder. To learn more, including working with us, visit allianceforliving.org. Newport Mansions presenting the 19th annual Newport Mansions Wine and Food Festival, September 20th through 22nd at Rosecliff. 3 days of expert seminars, wines and spirit tastings, and an opening night vintner dinner with master chef and author Jacques Pepin. Tickets and information at newportmansions.org. And SCAD, the Southeastern Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, is offering a $3,500 sign-on bonus for licensed clinicians. Go to licenseclinicians.org to learn more. That's licenseclinicians.org. It's one of the most famous Newport mansions. We visit the Breakers in Rhode Island and get a first look at their new tour of the previously unseen private third floor of the property in the mansion's 130-year history. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. America has some amazing historic properties, and Connecticut East This Week was invited by the Preservation Society of Newport County in Rhode Island to get a first look at a new tour of the third floor of the famous Breakers Mansion, previously the home of the Vanderbilt family. It's the first time in the 130-year history of the property that the public will get to see this part of the house, and I was guided through it by Leslie Jones, Chief Curator of Newport Mansions. And for full transparency, we should say that Newport Mansions is an advertiser and supporter of the podcast. We are here at the Breakers, which is one of the 11 properties in Newport that you look after. If there's anyone out there who hasn't heard of the Breakers, and there may be a few, just explain what the Breakers is.
It's a historic house museum now that we are in charge of caring and preserving as well as presenting to the public, but it was built for the Vanderbilt family in 1895 for Cornelius and Alice Vanderbilt and their family. So it was essentially a very large house built for just 6 weeks a year in terms of the Newport summer season, but we do know that the family came and used it on many other occasions outside of summer. We use it now to help educate the public on aspects of history, whether it be social, cultural, architecture, as well as decorative arts, and we're using a new tour on the third floor to actually further our educational mission and discuss conservation and preservation that we are actively doing.
And that segues nicely into the fact that we are standing on the third floor, which it's the first time, I believe, in the 130-year history that people are going to be able to access this?
Yes, that's correct. The family has been great partners with the Preservation Society along our history as an institution. We've been working within this house since the late 1940s, and it's our joy and excitement to be able to showcase the third floor as a public experience for the first time.
What was the decision behind opening this up?
Well, I think we were so excited as well as curious about the third floor. It had been occupied by the family through an agreement with the Preservation Society for many, many years, and we now have the opportunity to study the space. What's so incredible about it is the foresight the family had on preservation matters. So essentially their approach to all of this was to leave everything as is, to maintain it as best as possible, and for preservationists and curators, it's a dream come true to have a fully intact interior that has not changed since 1895. That is such a rare opportunity, and so we've been learning so much through their acts of preservation, the way that they cared for these spaces, and we're looking forward to taking that into several different directions. Again, educate the public on what it is that we do as an institution, but then also to help promote and continue the legacy of the Vanderbilt family.
Part of what people will see on the tour, apart from rooms that have never been seen before, they will see active preservation taking place, which is awesome to see. But also you're going to leave some of the rooms or parts of them untouched to show how time actually does have an effect on properties.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the common misconceptions, and it's pretty easy to understand. We have members of the public that come into our spaces and see them in this glorious condition and assume they were just left this way when the family decided to create a museum. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It is a lot of dedicated and hard work done by just a group of incredible professionals that are at the top of their fields. And we want to make sure that we highlight that work because it is ongoing. It never ends. It never stops. And also just an opportunity to showcase that in one space and to also communicate the idea of what a period of significance is for a historic house. So often we have examples, and we are guilty of this ourselves, where we pinpoint one aspect of history and focus on that for your entire visitor experience at one given property. And here on the third floor, in the eventual outcome of this tour, you will be able to progress through these rooms through over 120 years of history to sort of see how the family changed, how the world around them changed, and how those two aspects sort of intertwine together and give you a broader picture of history.
Talk to us about the room that we're currently stood in. What was it used for?
So this was the bedroom of Cornelius Vanderbilt III, otherwise known as Neely. He was the oldest surviving son of Cornelius and Alice Vanderbilt, who built the house. And the walls are sort of a light brown color as we see them today. They're covered with a linen material that has beautiful ticking and striping that goes down it, as well as cornice that's made with applique treatment and fringe, beautiful pelmets that also surround all of the windows. But again, it's this dark brown color. And then when you start to look around the room a bit more, you see these shadows of deep dark blue. And so what we've noticed about this room and being able to study it now is that this room was originally actually a deep dark blue, but for some reason now it's brown. And working with our textile conservator, as well as consulting historic resources, we've come to find out that this is likely a very early example of synthetic dyes being used to create textiles for architectural and interior design. Over time, that has proved that it won't fade from a dark blue to a light blue, but from a dark blue to a light brown. So it's quite an interesting visual experience to see these various layers and levels of light and time exposure in the space.
From a lay point of view, because clearly I'm not the expert at all, as I look around here, apart from seeing a little bit of water damage on a couple of the walls, I mean, this looks very, very intact. And I mean, what type of things possibly are going to happen here? Are you going to be doing a lot of preservation in here?
Well, we have already started work in this space. I would consider it about a quarter of the way finished. We have studied the floors, which are a beautiful herringbone oak, and we have gently sanded them and then refinished them based on finishes we found throughout the house. We've also done some correction work for plaster that was failing in these areas on the ceilings and repainted them, which is both preservation work as well as aesthetic work. So it looks absolutely beautiful. But again, there's not that much we had to think about in terms of large preservation projects because of the excellent condition the house was left in.
Well, that answers my question as to why it looks so good then. Just quickly explain to us about the fireplace, because I'm guessing every bedroom has got a fireplace, because of course, you know, they didn't have like forced air or anything like that back then. But that's, what type of material is that?
It's an Italian marble. And what's great about the house itself in this space, we know through partnering with other institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Historic New England, where a lot of the design comes from. So Ogden Codman was the interior designer for the second and third floors of the house. And so the watercolor elevations for this level of the house exist in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection, where Ogden Codman's papers are. And so we're seeing that this is the original marble, that it corresponds with these drawings that exist from the 1890s. And then the furniture that Codman had produced for the room, anything that had a surface on it would have a matching marble top. So these rooms are created with a suite of furniture that all coordinates with the architectural detail. They're really just incredible jewel boxes individually, but then collectively it's a jewel mansion.
So Leslie, we've now stepped into what I have to say is one of the most grandest bathrooms I think I've ever seen.
And it's one of three that's on this level. So to reiterate, the third floor was designed for just the sons of the Vanderbilt. Mom and dad and sisters were downstairs on the second floor, and then the three sons were on the third floor. So this bathroom is between Reggie's bedroom, who's the youngest son, and the living room, or family room as it's also known, on the third floor. It has a claw-footed tub, it has the original toilet outfittings, the original sink, and we also do have the original furniture, which you're not seeing in the room currently, but it will be on view for the tour. Just like our bathtubs downstairs that we point out on the general tour, there are 4 options in terms of your water sources for the bathtub: hot and cold normal water, and then hot and cold salt water. That's quite a unique feature of the breakers. Salt water was considered sort of this medicinal idea, just like we use bath salts today. Unfortunately, what we've come to find out is, while it was a great idea and was very advanced for the time period, it didn't last very long as an amenity because the pipes corroded. So best laid plans. The room that we're in now, though, there's 2 bathrooms that are identical. This is what we're going to be interpreting as the bathroom reflecting sort of the 1990s era of the families living on the 3rd floor. We've chosen very specifically not to refinish the floors here. They've just received a very light coat of wax, but when you visit, you'll notice that there's a significant difference in the tone of the floor. This is much darker. It's had years of exposure to light infiltration from, UV coming through the windows, but then also just more heavy use of the floor, which of course just embeds dirt and debris that just ends up sitting on top. So you'll see those very significant differences, but that again is to show what an original 1895 intent was versus how these houses just change over time.
I'm looking at something on the wall here. It's a lighting fixture. Was that gas in there?
It was. What we've come to find out too about this space, again through the recent exposure we've had to it and the study, was most of the 3rd floor was actually outfitted for just gas light, whereas by contrast in the rest of the house, there was electricity for 1895, which was highly advanced. There were other areas for gas lighting. For example, the servants' quarter was only gas lighting. Later on, the family does decide after the 20th century to electrify most of the house. So there are some fittings that were converted from gas to electric and some like this that have always remained gas but aren't operable. So there are, again, these really wonderful generational moments where you can see how this house progressed and as technology advanced, how the Vanderbilt family responded to that technology, which again is just a dream for people like me in terms of interpreting these historic spaces. There was a high level of craftsmanship and quality that went into the completion of this house, and it shows. These were fittings that were designed to last several lifetimes, and they have.
So Leslie, we've stepped into, did you call it the living room?
Yes, the 3rd floor living room.
We're looking at a lot of people out on the grass there, but more to the point, an absolutely fabulous view. Just talk us through it.
So this space that we're currently in, we refer to both the living room as well as the family room, and it was an area that was designed for the young Vanderbilt sons to possibly, have a place to read, do a bit of recreational activities, whatever that might be. But they really had this incredibly captivating view overlooking the lawn that then abuts the ocean itself, and also overlooks the geographical feature that actually gives the house its name, the breakers. There's a great part over here where when the water comes in, it breaks actually as part of this peninsula here. So it's really a beautiful space to look out at. And you can't even imagine what young teenage men of 1890s must have been thinking when they had this view. On the tour, we mentioned briefly the family's deep connection to water. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, actually starts the family's wealth and great fortune on the water, creating a ferry business through steamships from Staten Island to Manhattan. And then, of course, is a pioneer with investing in the railroad and rail travel and rail transportation. So this deep connection to the water exists through multiple generations of the family. And we just never want to forget where the family came from, as well as what they were able to achieve with this great success.
You were talking earlier as well about, it's like the water and the salt water, and it was, that was unique. And they've obviously got some very interesting features in here. To me, this is actually quite interesting. We've got it looks like 2 doors to go out onto the balcony, and then before that, it looks like some sort of plantation type blind, which clearly would have gone across and, darkened the room. But it's the double door that interests me. Or is it a window? It sort of obviously helped to reduce noise. Not that I'm guessing there was a lot of noise back then, but is this sort of another of these like interesting architectural things that they decided to just have done with the overall building?
Well, what we have on the very exterior of the house is a storm window, and that's considering the fact that while this house was built for the use during summer, it existed during the winter, and pretty harsh weather circumstances do come off of the Atlantic Ocean here. So it's a measure of protection, but you're right, there is another door that is here to be opened to allow that incredible breeze to come through the space. On some occasions, as a part of the tour, we will have to do that in order to keep the house cool, at least on this floor, since our geothermal system doesn't extend to the 3rd floor. And that's also why these sliding louvered shades are here, again, again, to potentially block out any unwanted sun because it can be very bright depending on the time of day, but then also to let the air flow through with these really ingenious louvers that were designed as a part of the door's function.
So just before we leave to go on our next room, we're looking at these beautiful walls. Again, I believe it's fabric, but you were saying it's not the original, and there's quite an upsetting story behind this.
Yes, so within the living room, every wall in this room actually has reproduction fabric that's been placed here. That's a beautiful pattern, very different from the other spaces where it's all solid colors, but this pattern is a reproduction that the family put in the early 2000s. My understanding is that when they returned for the summer season, unfortunately, a family of bats had also made their home here, and they had basically torn through and eaten through the original silk and silk damask upholstery that was on the walls, and so the decision was made to reproduce and completely recover the entire room. So we have here as an interpretation of the past, but also a great story.
So we've just been walking down the corridor into a room which is interesting because I'm looking at one bit of it over your shoulder, and there's a claw-footed bath in what now appears to be a bit of a water closet, and then also we've got a kitchen. So what's going on here?
So this is what we call the kitchen affectionately on the third floor. It was added in the 1940s when the family decided to move to the third floor as a part of a sort of cooperation with the Preservation Society of Newport County. We were a very young institution and trying to take on really incredible efforts for preservation across Newport's landscape. But we needed a revenue source to help fund that work. And Countess Gladys Sashani, who was Gladys Vanderbilt and had inherited the house, was very kind and selfless to lease the breakers to us for $1 a year. We were then able to operate tours downstairs and keep that revenue in order to finance what we were doing across Newport with colonial properties at the time. She was a countess, so Countess Sashani then moved her family up to the third floor so they would have more privacy because they did still own the house. And as a part of that, they needed access to a space where they could boil an egg, make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. And so this small little galley kitchen was installed, and it has electric burner and electric warming drawers. It has probably a mid-20th century refrigerator right here. It's outfitted with a can opener, with a sink, as well as cabinetry that houses some glassware that is very expertly labeled using family handwriting that we're now familiar with. So it's one of the more quirky spaces, but also something that we find to be incredibly valuable in terms of, again, this progression through history and how there was adaptation for this space. Mind you also what you were referencing before with the bathroom that exists in this space. This was originally a full bathroom. And so, again, from their preservation mindedness, they put up a false wall and enclosed the toilet and the bathtub in one section and kept the kitchen in the other section with very minimal intrusion on the original materials. So early preservation at its best.
I just asked you what this was, and if you can hear an echo, listeners, we're in this fabulous, you called it the third floor landing, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Talk us through it, because there's lots and lots going on here.
So it's a very sort of unique entrance to a level of this house. There's no level that's like the other here at the Breakers, but when you come up to the third floor, you are sort of greeted by a platform area that you have to ascend a few steps to get to. And it has a railing around it with banisters that are all beautifully carved and turned railings. And the color of this whole space is sort of a matte terracotta. Now, that's not the exact paint color that was selected. We actually had to create the paint color to match what our conservators were able to determine through paint examination. So multiple samples were taken using sort of surgical-like instruments such as scalpels to remove parts of the wall and then examine them under the microscope. And what we found and determined was the color that we were sort of greeted with when we first were able to examine the space was the original color that it was since the 1890s. So again, the family made incredibly important decisions to maintain that color and not, change it to whatever the latest fad was. Nothing had been whitewashed here. It was all very beautifully maintained and retained. So that's the color that we have here today is original, and it's fitting with the house too. It's an Italianate designed house, which there's no house in Italy that's like this because it has its own American spin, but the colors that are being selected, like this rich terracotta, reflect those design ideas that we know the architect Richard Morris Hunt had examined as a part of his early travels and studies when he was in school for architecture in Paris and then went subsequently around the European continent. So all of these great international influences coming together in one place here in Newport.
As we're talking, I've just spotted something here on the wainscoting. Is it buttons? It's like brass, and explain what this is.
Yes, this is just one of the examples of cutting-edge technology that was in the breakers when it was finished in 1895. These are buttons for call service. So when the house was finished, there were sort of these three buttons that were present throughout the house in all of the rooms, particularly the rooms for the Vanderbilt family, and they would have customized places in which you could call to for service for the people that were serving the household. Across the hallway from us, what you'll see on the tour is there were also speaking tubes, which has a beautiful brass plaque, and it has engraved on that brass where you could lift up the flap and then literally speak into the tube, and it would go down to a certain part of the house where you needed to communicate something rather quickly. A few years later, we know after the turn of the 20th century, they did end up installing a telephone system, which is also on view in the hallway. So we can see as technology is advancing, the Vanderbilts are subscribing to what the newest and latest inventions are. So it's a great juxtaposition of original intent, and then as new models were coming, they wanted to be very much on trend with that.
We've done a bit of a tour. We want obviously people to come and look at it, so we're not going to give every secret away. We are stood at the top of the amazing staircase in property here. What do you want people to take away from the tour when they come to visit it? It's only going to be, maximum of 10 people per tour?
I think first and foremost, it's to appreciate the legacy of the Vanderbilt family and what they have done for this property over many decades and generations. It would not be here, and we would not be here without that dedication. I'm hoping also that the public will see just how much goes into the work that we do here. It's not just polishing a brass handle here and there. It's very strict and very serious work that we take very seriously. We have a team of professionals in our various departments that look after these properties and the collections, and we have dedicated ourselves to not only keeping them open and ready for visitors of today, but also forecasting for the future and making sure that all of these spaces will last hundreds of years past our lifetimes.
Am I correct in understanding as well that when people do come on these tours and they start 24th of June, people need to be aware as well, and we should make this very clear right now, there are a lot of stairs. I believe it's 70 stairs that they have to climb to get up here?
77 stairs from the very beginning to the very end. So it is stair intensive, but there are opportunities to break as you ascend the staircase to the third floor. But I think experiencing that also gives you a sense of what it was like then for a family member if they were to take the stairs, to walk the same footsteps as the Vanderbilt family, to walk the stairs that were designed by Richard Morris Hunt, who was just an architectural genius. It gives you a sense of really being a part of the history and becoming a part of the house's history itself, since this is a tour that we've been waiting for a very long time to put together and share with the public. The first few people that occupy the tour on the 24th will be making history for themselves and for us.
They may even possibly see, depending on the day they come, they might actually see preservation actually in action?
Oh, absolutely. We'll be having our team of professionals up here constantly working and planning for the next steps. The tour itself, the content may evolve as the tour continues, and that's, of course, working to this final objective of creating a timeline that you're able to walk through of the house and the family history. So it's something you'll want to come visit multiple times to see how the experience shifts and changes. And again, it also just helps promote and make sure that our work can continue.
Well, Leslie Jones, Chief Curator, ever so many thanks for taking us behind the scenes of this amazing third floor here at the Breakers. It is truly mesmerising, even as we stand here now, and I know it's not quite ready for the public to see, but they'll be seeing it very soon. Thank you for taking us around, and thank you to you and your team for everything that you do to continue to keep these properties in the shape that they're in so that all of us can continue to view them for years to come.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
And if you're interested in going on the new third floor tour of the Breakers, then tickets are on sale now, and the first tour will be on June 24th. You can find out all the details by visiting newportmansions.org and clicking on the Breakers on the home page. The tour lasts around 1 hour, and remember, it is stair intensive. Connecticut East This Week is made possible by Alliance for Living, the only HIV/AIDS service organisation and resource centre in southeastern Connecticut that also deals with homelessness and assists people dealing with substance use disorder. We are currently seeking a finance and grants coordinator to join our team. Those with grants management experience and a passion for the work we do in the community are encouraged to apply. For full job description and benefits, as well as other open positions, visit allianceforliving.org. Newport Mansions, as seen on HBO's The Gilded Age. Newport Mansions preserves and protects 11 historic properties and landscapes in Newport, Rhode Island, exemplifying 3 centuries of achievements in American architecture, decorative arts, and landscape design. Plan your visit this year and attend some of the mansion's signature events, including the Newport Flower Show, June 21st to 23rd, Newport Mansions Wine and Food Festival, September 20th to 22nd, and holidays at the Newport Mansions, November 23rd to January 1st. Tickets and information at newportmansions.org. And
SCAD, the Southeastern Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, is looking for licensed clinicians and is offering the top benefits packages in the state. Go to licensedclinicians.org to learn more. That's licensedclinicians.org.
Time now for a look at other stories making the headlines recently. American forces commemorated 2 major World War II events recently, the 82nd anniversary of the Battle of Midway and the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings at Normandy in 1944. At the new London submarine base, Navy and local leaders, along with the families of those involved, marked the events at a special ceremony. Master Chief Dean Brown, a Battle of Midway submarine veteran of the USS Trout and later an employee of Electric Boat in Groton, was remembered for his part in history. He died just a few years ago. Brown's daughter, Jessica Hoadley, was at the ceremony and said her father's stories are as relevant today as they were 82 years ago.
It's wonderful for us to hear our father's stories, and one of the local authors in town just wrote a book of my father's stories and just published it, and so his war stories are going to be available for everyone, and it's just wonderful for our family for him to have done that, because the world is volatile and our democracy is at stake right now, so I think it's very important.
Midway was the turning point in history that brought victory in the Pacific for the United States and its allies in 1942 against the Empire of Japan. And on D-Day, more than 150,000 Allied troops, including 73,000 from the US, stormed the beaches of Normandy and France against Nazi Germany. That would ultimately be the beginning of the end of World War II. Among them, the story of 28-year-old Ensign Lawrence S. Karnowski of the Naval Civil Engineering Corps, whose job was to help clear the Normandy beaches of German mines. His story was read by 29-year-old Lieutenant Ryan Seawey, also of the Naval Civil Engineering Corps, who said the history of these men is still taught today.
Each one was more incredible than the last. They all had their own sectors to cover, and I think that was one of the biggest things that stuck out to me, was that no matter what rank or where they were at, what beach they were on, they all, attack their sector and take the beach and make a win for the Allies.
As the weather warms up, so do accidents outside, especially when using chainsaws, lawnmowers and other gardening tools, and bleeding is the #1 preventable cause of death if injured. Lawrence Memorial Hospital in New London, part of Yale New Haven Health, are running free community courses to teach people how to stop and control bleeding. Pat Davis is a course tutor and paramedic and says having this knowledge really is life-saving.
Since someone can bleed out and pass within 3 to 5 minutes of not being able to control the bleed, that's a lot faster than emergency services can respond. So we're trying to teach as many lay public as we can to just try to stem that from somebody bleeding to death and potentially saving a life. So the more people we can get trained on and not afraid to touch somebody who's bleeding, better off we'll be.
The course teaches people how to pack a wound and apply pressure and how to correctly apply and use a tourniquet. Terry LeBlanc lives in Mystic and attended the course after speaking to her daughter, who is a nurse, who urged her to go.
I think when you see somebody bleeding, at first you're not sure really what to do. What should I do? Should I put pressure? Again, what's the difference between needing a tourniquet or just applying pressure or packing a wound? I think anytime you can learn something about, especially an unfamiliar subject, I think is always helpful and important. So, yes, I would encourage it.
Details of the courses can be found by contacting Trauma Program Manager Jessica Mansarella at L&M, and general resources and first aid products can be found by visiting stopthebleed.org. Visitors to Mystic Seaport Museum can now find out what it's like to live on a submarine and explore the depths of the oceans at a new immersive exhibition. Voyage to the Deep Underwater Adventures is a touring exhibition that allows visitors to touch and explore everything about our oceans. Emma Molinas is Mystic Seaport's Exhibits and Special Projects Coordinator and said it's great for the whole family and introduces them to the wonders of writer Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Captain Nemo.
There's all sorts of content for folks to engage with, which we're really excited is being offered in both English and Spanish. So you can come in and learn the different rooms on a sub and how people lived. There's a whole interactive where you can figure out if you would be a good submariner. You can learn all about Jules Verne and his other works that he created. We have a lot of content in here about the ocean and the animals that you would see around you. So there's a lot of content for adults and older children to dive into and help engage their younger children.
The exhibition is open now until Labor Day, and details can be found at mysticseaport.org. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week. And you can listen to the show again on our social platforms, on demand, and by asking your smart speaker to play Connecticut East This Week podcast. And please like, follow, and share on your social media too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.